Everyone at the table got a plate, except me. Sparkling forks clicked softly against fine porcelain, and silver trays glided past my shoulder as if I were invisible. I kept my hands folded politely on my lap, even as the scent of strawberry mille-feuille drifted in front of my nose and vanished with the servers. I wasn't part of their world. I didn't have a gown that shimmered or a last name that opened doors. I was there on someone else's invitation, a quiet friend of a friend, tucked at the end of the table, clutching borrowed dignity like a clutch bag I didn't know how to carry. "Just water, thank you," I'd said earlier, trying to avoid attention. But somehow they noticed me anyway, only to exclude me more quietly than a scream ever could. I glanced around and smiled, pretending not to care. But the burn behind my eyes told another story. Across the table, someone whispered something, and a few others chuckled without even trying to hide it. My napkin felt tighter in my fingers, my chest heavier with each ignored second. The waitress skipped my spot once more, and someone muttered, "Maybe it's not her kind of night." I looked down, but before I could sink further into the velvet chair, I heard a voice, low, clear, and firm. Why wasn't she served? The room fell silent. All heads turned to him, the CEO, standing, holding a wine glass like a gavel. He turned toward the chef and said, "Serve her first." For a second, I didn't even realize he was talking about me. My pulse stopped. The room stood still. The chef looked confused, his hand frozen mid-gesture, holding a dessert plate meant for someone else. "Sir," he asked hesitantly, but the CEO didn't blink. He nodded toward me, the quiet girl in the muted dress, the one no one spoke to all night, and repeated, "She's the only reason I'm even at this table." That sentence cracked the air like thunder. Gasps circled the room like perfume. I could feel my ears heat up, my palms damp against the fabric of my lap. People stared, pretending not to. Some with widened eyes, others with tightly pressed lips. Even the ones who laughed earlier were suddenly straightening their posture. The chef approached with trembling hands, carefully placing the plate in front of me as if it were sacred. A glistening mille-feuille, 3 layers high, crowned with sugared strawberries and a gold leaf. "For you, miss," he whispered. My hands shook slightly as I reached for the fork. Across from me, someone dropped their spoon. Another cleared their throat. It didn't matter. Not anymore. Because when I looked up, the CEO was still watching me, not like I was fragile, but like I was worth defending. And for the first time that night, I let myself breathe. I wasn't an accident at this table. I wasn't someone they were doing a favor for. I mattered. And the man they all listened to, the one they feared and admired, had made sure everyone knew it. But not everyone looked impressed. At the far end of the table, a woman in an emerald gown set down her champagne glass with just a little too much force. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well," she said sweetly, "I suppose we're all just giving out sympathy desserts now." A few nervous chuckles followed, but the CEO didn't even flinch. He turned his head slowly toward her, voice low but crystal clear. "Sympathy," he said. "You mean the woman who helped my company recover during the last quarter while you were in Mykonos." Silence. The air changed again, sharper now. Her face twitched, the muscles in her jaw tightening as she reached for her napkin. "She wasn't on the guest list," someone whispered nearby. But no one dared say it louder. No one moved. I sat there with the dessert untouched, suddenly unsure whether to cry or run or simply vanish. But I did neither, because right then he glanced back at me, not with pity, not with showmanship, but with something that almost looked like pride. Like this moment was overdue. Like he'd been waiting for the world to see what he already knew. I straightened my back, placed the napkin on my lap, and took the first bite. And as the sugar melted on my tongue, I felt something shift inside me. Not just dignity. Power. Quiet, still, and deeply rooted. Whatever story they had written about me before this night, it was over. A new chapter had just begun, and this time I would not be erased. The next morning, the headlines weren't about the gala. They were about me. Or rather, about the mysterious woman who sat beside CEO Kong Min-jun while wearing a $22 dress. I stared at my cracked phone screen, blinking through the disbelief. There I was, my face half-turned, fork midair, dessert untouched. The photo had captured something raw, something unpolished. But the comments, oh, the comments. Some called me an attention seeker. Others praised the CEO for uplifting the staff. I wasn't staff. Not anymore. But to them, that detail didn't matter. I had become a symbol, a placeholder for every woman who'd ever been underestimated in a room, full of designer labels and inherited power. I didn't know how to respond, or even if I should. My inbox was flooded with journalists, invitations, interview requests. And yet, my fridge still hummed its same dull hum, and the floorboards still creaked in the hallway when I walked barefoot. The world was talking about me, but no one was asking how I felt. No one asked why I had been at that table in the first place, or why I hadn't corrected anyone when they assumed I was just the help. But Min-jun knew. He knew I used to clean those floors, knew I once stayed late to fix a broken pipe in the women's restroom when no one else showed up. He knew because he saw me then, and still chose to speak now. So when his assistant called that afternoon to say he'd like to meet again, privately, my hand didn't tremble when I said yes. We met in a quiet cafe tucked behind the old opera house, his choice, not mine. It wasn't glamorous like the gala, but it smelled like roasted beans and honesty. He was already there when I arrived, no assistant, no photographers. Just him. And 2 mugs. I sat down cautiously, still unsure if this was a PR gesture or something more personal. But the moment I looked into his eyes, I knew. This wasn't about appearances. "They think I saved you," he said, stirring his coffee without drinking it. "But I just reminded them who you are." I blinked. No one had ever said that to me before. Not like that. Not without strings. "You didn't have to do that," I whispered, my voice quieter than I intended. He leaned in, elbows on the table, gaze unwavering. "You were denied a seat, denied dessert, denied dignity. I didn't do anything noble. I just hate injustice." His words clung to me like steam on a mirror. For years, I had trained myself to disappear into rooms, to serve silently, to never expect more than what was handed to me. But here he was, telling me I deserved to be seen. Not pitted, not rescued, just seen. I didn't know how to respond, so I smiled. And for the first time in days, I didn't feel small. I felt like maybe, just maybe, this moment was bigger than a headline. Maybe this was the start of something neither of us expected. Something unspoken, delicate, but impossible to ignore. He walked me home that evening, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The streetlights painted golden reflections on the wet pavement, and every step felt like borrowed time. We didn't talk much. He carried a soft silence with him, one that didn't demand attention, but offered space. When we reached my door, I fumbled with the key, pretending it was stuck, just to delay the moment. "Thank you for everything," I said, finally turning to face him. He didn't nod or dismiss it like most people did. Instead, he looked at me like I was the only story worth reading. "Next time," he said softly, "don't wait for someone to speak up for you. Your voice carries more power than you think." Then he stepped back, hands in pockets, and walked away into the quiet night. I stood there, heart thudding in my chest, trying to breathe through all the feelings that didn't have names yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything, the push, the table, the dessert, the chef's nervous hands, and that one sentence that changed everything. "Serve her first." It echoed like a crack in a cold wall. I used to think that being invisible kept me safe. But maybe I was just hiding from the fear that no one would ever choose me in the light. And yet he did. Not as a spectacle, not for a favor, but in front of everyone, like I belonged there all along. It wasn't about dessert. It was about dignity. And somehow he knew exactly what had been taken from me, and gave it back without asking for anything in return. The next morning, everything tasted different. Even my coffee, which I used to drink out of habit, felt warmer, fuller. Not because anything had changed around me, but because something inside me had. For the first time in a long time, I looked in the mirror and didn't see just the help. I saw someone who had stood in a gilded room, denied the smallest courtesy, and then been honored like a guest of honor. And it wasn't a fantasy. It had actually happened. People had watched it, heard it, felt it. I walked to work with a straighter back that day. The hallway didn't seem so narrow anymore. But as I passed the reception desk, two coworkers, ones who hadn't even looked at me during the gala, whispered behind their mugs. "That's the girl from the dessert thing," one said. The other replied, "She's got the CEO wrapped around her finger." I kept walking, but their words clung to me like perfume I hadn't asked to wear. In the break room, someone had left a fancy pastry box on the table. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I knew it wasn't for me. And somehow, that didn't sting anymore. Because the night before had shown me that being chosen once, publicly and with intention, carried a weight stronger than all the glances I was now dodging. But still, questions lingered. Why had he done it? Why me? What did it mean? Was it kindness? Guilt? Or something more dangerous, like interest? I knew better than to assume anything when it came to men in power. But the way he had looked at me, that wasn't pity. That was something else. And if I was honest, it scared me more than anything I'd felt in years. At lunchtime, I avoided the main cafeteria and found a quiet spot on the rooftop where the city hummed below like a secret. I needed space. I needed to breathe without feeling watched. But I wasn't alone for long. The door creaked open and I turned, half expecting a coworker with another sideways remark. But it was him, the CEO. No suit this time, just a gray sweater, sleeves pushed up, hair slightly tousled like he hadn't meant to be seen. My chest tightened. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. I stood, unsure if I should greet him formally or pretend I didn't recognize him. He answered the question for me. "You left too early last night," he said, stepping closer. "The chef made a second dessert just for you. He was upset you didn't try it." I laughed nervously. I didn't think I'd be missed. He sat down across from me without invitation. "You were the only one I noticed." That silence between us, it wasn't awkward. It was heavy, almost magnetic. "You didn't have to do what you did," I whispered, not looking at him. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out at the skyline, then said, "People forget who makes their world function. I don't." It sounded noble, too noble, and yet sincere. My mind spun with warnings, memories, past humiliations. I didn't want to be a story, but I also didn't want to run. Not this time. He wasn't trying to impress me. He was trying to understand me. And I was starting to wonder if maybe I wanted him to. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver spoon, engraved, delicate. "It was my mother's," he said. "She used to sneak it into her purse whenever she was served last at events. Said it was her silent protest." I blinked, unsure whether to laugh or cry. He held it out, gently, resting it on the space between us. "Last night reminded me of her. You didn't deserve that." His voice held no pity, only quiet recognition. I stared at the spoon. Such a strange, simple thing, yet it felt heavier than gold. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my throat tightening. Is it guilt? Pity? Or just a habit of rescuing girls like me? He didn't flinch. "It's none of those," he said. "I just don't like watching someone strong be treated like they're invisible." That word, invisible, echoed louder than the clinking glasses from the gala. I'd worn it like a second skin for years. I took the spoon, not as a gift, but as a challenge. A reminder. And for the first time, I didn't apologize for existing in his world. He smiled, not a charming CEO grin, but something hesitant, unsure. Like he wasn't used to being seen either. "I'll be late for my next meeting," he said, standing slowly. "But if you ever want to eat dessert first, let me know." He left without another word. disappearing through the same door he'd entered. I stood there, the spoon warming in my hand, the city stretching before me, and wondered, when did the world shift enough for someone like him to see someone like me? The next day, the entire building seemed to hum with whispers. Secretaries paused their typing when I passed. Interns straightened up, trying not to stare. It wasn't just about the dessert anymore, it was what he said. Serve her first. Those 3 words had cracked something in the hierarchy they all obeyed. Suddenly, I wasn't just the girl who cleaned up after events. I was the girl the CEO spoke up for. And with that came both awe and resentment. At lunch, someone had left an almond tart on my desk. No note, just the pastry, delicate and untouched, sitting atop a white napkin folded like origami. I stared at it for a long time, unsure if it was a peace offering or a test. But I didn't eat it, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want their crumbs. I wanted my own plate, my own seat, my own choice. That afternoon, the CEO's fiancée walked past me in the lobby. Her heels clicked like accusations. Her eyes scanned me slowly, from my worn shoes to the slightly chipped nail polish on my thumb. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The tension around her mouth, the deliberate coldness, those were words enough. But I didn't lower my eyes this time. I held her gaze steady, not angry, just present, as if to say I'm not leaving, not fading. When she finally looked away, it wasn't victory I felt. It was realization. Maybe I wasn't the only one afraid of being overlooked. Maybe power, money, beauty, it didn't protect you from the fear of invisibility. That thought sat with me longer than any dessert ever could. Later that evening, I received an unexpected message on the company's internal system. It was from the CEO. Just one line. If you're still in the building, I'd like to show you something. I hesitated, fingers frozen above the keyboard. My heart pounded like I was about to do something wrong, something dangerous. But I wasn't. Not this time. I replied, I'm still here. 10 minutes later, I stepped into the Rooftop lounge, someplace only executives ever talked about, never somewhere I imagined myself standing. He was already there, silhouetted by the skyline, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. This view, he said, turning slowly, reminds me of why I built this place. I said nothing. I didn't know if he was speaking to me or to a memory. But then he added, not everyone starts at the top. Some of us mop floors first. That made me blink. He wasn't being condescending. He was connecting, leveling the ground between us. You made everyone in that room stop and see me. I finally said, why? He looked at me then, truly looked. Because I saw you first. That sentence didn't feel like romance. It felt like recognition. Like he understood the exhaustion of always being last in line, of being talked over, dismissed. The weight of silence we were taught to carry. You shouldn't have to prove your worth, he added, softer now. But if you're willing to fight for it, I'll back you. It wasn't a promise. It was a partnership. And standing there on that rooftop, surrounded by stars and steel, I realized I didn't feel small anymore. When I returned home that night, I didn't cry. I thought I would. After everything, the humiliation, the attention, the rooftop moment that felt unreal, I expected a wave to hit me. But it didn't. I just sat at the edge of my small bed, still in my work uniform, and felt still. Like I had finally stopped running. Like something had shifted. The way he looked at me wasn't romantic. Not in the way stories usually tell it. It was serious, deliberate, like someone who had made a decision. And maybe I had too. I pulled out the small notebook I always carried and flipped to a blank page. At the top I wrote, Project, New Beginning. It sounded silly, but it wasn't. It was the first time in years I thought about building something for myself, not just surviving. The next day, people stared when I walked into the building, but not with contempt. There was confusion, curiosity. Someone from the design team even smiled and offered me coffee. I declined, too stunned to answer. Was that respect or guilt? Either way, I kept walking, shoulders straighter than they'd ever been. And when I reached the janitorial wing, I paused before entering. For once, it didn't feel like a corner of shame. It felt like the place where everything began. I hung up my coat, took a deep breath, and looked in the mirror. My reflection wasn't a servant. It was a woman who had been underestimated for far too long. And finally, someone powerful had spoken aloud what I never dared to say. She matters. The invitations came in ivory envelopes with gold lettering. I found mine folded between cleaning checklists on the reception desk, as if someone didn't know where else to leave it. At first, I thought it was a mistake. But my name was printed clearly, first and last. No title, no role. Just me. The gala's follow-up event was being hosted on the same rooftop, and this time, it wasn't about donors or executives. It was the CEO's personal celebration, and apparently, I was on the guest list. Part of me wanted to ignore it, walk away and keep my distance. But something pulled me in. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the memory of him standing in front of everyone, defending me like I was untouchable. Or maybe it was the part of me that had been invisible for too long and now wanted to be seen. I stood at the edge of the rooftop again, but not in uniform. I wore the same dress I had saved for years, the one I never dared to wear. It wasn't fancy, just soft blue with tiny floral patterns, like memories sewn into fabric. I didn't need pearls or heels. I just needed to stand there, unashamed. And then I heard footsteps. Slow, familiar. I turned. He didn't say anything at first. Just looked at me like I was the only person up there. You came, he said softly. I nodded. You invited me, I whispered. There was a pause, like something was shifting between us again. Not obligation. Not performance. Just truth. No, he said finally. I reminded them you always belonged here. He walked closer, but slower this time, like he wasn't trying to make a statement, like he just wanted to be near. I could feel my breath catching, not because I was nervous, but because I didn't know where this was going. His eyes scanned the space around me as if making sure no one would interrupt. I didn't know what you'd say, he admitted. After everything, his voice drifted, but I caught the hesitation. And I understood it. We weren't two people who met in a perfect place. We met in a mess. Mine public, his political. We collided in a ballroom where I wasn't meant to exist, and somehow I still stood. I didn't answer immediately. I just looked at him. This man who once watched me mop the floor beneath his polished shoes and now waited for my words like they had weight. Why did you stand up for me? I asked finally. It wasn't just pity, was it? His face changed, not defensive, not wounded. Just real. No, he said quietly. It was recognition. He looked down for a moment, then met my gaze again. You see things others ignore. You don't perform for anyone. You carry dignity like armor, and I noticed it long before the dessert tray. I felt tears prickling, but I held them in. It wasn't the time for crying. It was the time for knowing. You didn't just change how they saw me, I whispered. You changed how I saw myself. He smiled then. Not the CEO smile, not the public face. Just him. Good, he replied, because this was never about dessert. It was about respect. And you deserve to taste that first. The banquet hall slowly emptied, but we remained near the edge of the marble floor, where only moments ago I had been ignored like I didn't belong. Now I stood there in silence with the man who'd redrawn the lines of that room just by choosing to speak. People had stopped pretending not to look. Some whispered, others stared, but no one approached. He didn't seem to care, and strangely, neither did I. A waiter passed by with a silver tray. On it sat a single, delicate plate. Crème brûlée, its surface crisp to perfection. The same dessert I was denied. The CEO took it without asking, turned to me, and offered the first spoon. Try it, he said. Tell me if it was worth the noise. I laughed, quietly but honestly. It wasn't about the dessert. It never was. But I took the bite anyway. It was sweet. Soft. Real. I didn't know what came next. Would he call me tomorrow? Would this moment fade when the music stopped? I didn't dare ask. I just let the warmth settle in my chest for once. That maybe someone had finally seen me. Not as an employee, not as a mistake, not as a background character in someone else's story, but as the woman who owned the moment. And somehow, maybe even more than the building. He turned to walk beside me toward the exit, but before we reached the doors, he paused. Next time, he said, I want to be the one invited to your table. I smiled and didn't look back, because for once, I wasn't chasing respect. I had already earned it.